Oh boy, talk about a scary title. That said, we go into this. This is how, pay attention right now, nuclear war unfolds. My friends, this is a doomsday scenario, but should be an interesting video. So, before I go into that, let me ask you for one thing. If you can leave a like, thank you so much. Is the best way to show support. Now, if you can subscribe, well, in that case, forget about it. You make my day. Have that in consideration. Link for the original video in my description, and let's play it.
Imagine the unthinkable. After months of escalating tensions in Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin makes a decision that changes everything. Facing potential
nuclear weapons,
military defeat and domestic pressure, he turns to the ultimate escalation tactic, one that he's threatened to use over 50 times by now. In fact, he first threatened to use nuclear weapons even before the special military operation was launched in 2022. But Putin and the rest of the world know that this single act would...
Okay, my friends, now a bit of real talk. This scares me a bit, because if NATO keeps helping Ukraine, and in my opinion they should, by the way, but Ukraine is putting a good fight against Russia, you know, so if Putin realizes that, okay, this war goes forever, I cannot win this as I thought, do you guys think the guy presses the red button? I mean, I know it's a very unlikely scenario, at least I want to hope so, but it's still a bit scary, specific for me living in Europe, right?
Was launched in 2022. But Putin and the rest of the world know that this single act would cross a line that cannot be uncrossed. NATO would likely respond with an outright declaration of war against Russia, and one that the latter wouldn't be able to win conventionally. So rather than wait for the inevitable Western response, Putin decides to strike first. He launches a coordinated nuclear attack against the United States and key NATO allies. What follows is not a prolonged conflict, but the fastest, most devastating war.
Oh my god, that one ended up beating Portugal. Did you guys saw that? I'm gone.
In human history.
Okay, you know what? Sending this one to America, there is no way to intercept this.
Time from the first launch to global devastation, less than 2 hours. This is how a nuclear war unfolds, minute by minute. At T-minus 15 minutes, Putin sits in his underground command bunker beneath the Kremlin. The war in Ukraine has reached a critical juncture. Ukrainian forces, backed by advanced Western weapons, have pushed Russian troops back across multiple fronts. Putin's military advisors present him with what they call limited nuclear options. A single tactical nuclear weapon, likely no more than a 10-kiloton warhead and slightly smaller than the one dropped on Hiroshima, could destroy Ukraine's resistance and shock NATO into negotiations. He has two options: go for the throat and try to hit Kyiv and the Ukrainian government, leaving the rest of the country scattered without its top command. Or the tactical weapon could be used on a smaller target like Kharkiv, Dnipro or Zaporizhia, places that Russia failed to occupy over the past 2 years. The first option might even allow Putin to win the war, in a way. With the Ukrainian government in shambles, Russia could either swoop in and try to finish the...
So basically, the first option would be, of course, would be devastating, but would be more about sending a message.
Win the war, in a way. With the Ukrainian government in shambles, Russia could either swoop in and try to finish the job with conventional means. Even if NATO declares a conventional war, Putin could simply withdraw and suggest that NATO has been the real aggressor the whole time. Propaganda that will be eaten up by the Russian population and its allies like China and India. The second option would prove to the world that his threats don't come empty and that Russia truly deserves to be one of the world's military superpowers. Faced with further escalation and more nuclear weapons coming their way, Ukraine...
You know what, my friends, I'm going to say something that may be controversial, but the fact that China and Russia are best friends right now just shows how ahead America really is, because the other two most powerful countries, apart from America, had to unite to face against the US.
Ukraine would practically be forced to capitulate or ask for an international response. But regardless of the option, he knows what comes next. The moment that warhead detonates, Russia will be at war with NATO, and in Putin's calculation, the only way to survive that war is to ensure NATO cannot fight back. Putin chooses one of the options and authorizes the strike. At T-minus 1 minute, a tactical nuclear weapon detonates near or in Zaporizhia, vaporizing a Ukrainian armored brigade and creating a mushroom cloud visible from space. Radiation detectors across Europe immediately register the detonation. Assuming the weapon used is a 10-kiloton nuclear bomb, the blast practically incinerates everything in a half-mile radius. Further out, people within a mile suffer severe burns alongside deadly radiation exposure. Buildings crumble under significant structural damage, and first responders are put on high alert to rescue and treat the survivors when the smoke clears.
So I know atomic bombs nowadays are quite more strong, but from what I understand, there was people that survived Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Actually, I believe there is a crazy story that the guy ended up surviving both, because for some reason the guy was in both cities. Don't fact check me on this, but I believe there is a story that a Japanese guy ended up facing both bombs and surviving. It's actually insane.
Radius of lighter damage, if we can call it that, spreads a few miles out of the center. A minute before, the city of Zaporizhia had around 700,000 people. A tactical weapon causes tens of thousands of deaths within the blast zone. Whoever is left in the city is evacuated. Within minutes, secure communication lines between Kyiv, Washington, London, Paris, and Berlin are buzzing with confirmation. Russia has crossed the nuclear threshold. Putin watches the global reaction unfold from his command center. He turns to Defense Minister André and delivers the order that will reshape human civilization.
André? That's why you guys think I'm Russian? Even André is a common name in Russia.
Launch everything. Russia's nuclear command system, known as Dead Hand or Perimeter, springs into action. Designed during the Cold War to ensure nuclear retaliation even if Soviet leadership was eliminated, the system begins its launch sequence. Across Russia's vast territory, 400 intercontinental ballistic missiles in underground silos receive encrypted launch codes. The road-mobile Topol-M launchers, hidden in forests and scattered across 11 time zones, begin their final preparations. Russia's fleet of nuclear submarines, the Borai-class boats carrying 16 Bulava missiles each, receive orders to surface and fire. Putin's target list is precise and devastating. In the United States, he targets the Pentagon, NORAD, as well as missile fields in Montana, Wyoming, and North Dakota. In the United Kingdom, the main targets are the Faslane Naval Base and government facilities in London. In France, the targets include the nuclear submarine base at Brest and Strategic Forces headquarters. In Germany, he targets the Ramstein Air Base and various NATO command centers. Other likely targets include the new NATO base in Romania, as well as US nuclear weapons sites in the Netherlands, Belgium, and Italy. The goal here isn't
Wait, don't tell me this is the first one shooting wins.
Conquest, but decapitation. Putin wants to eliminate NATO's ability to respond before they realize what's happening. At T+0 minutes, only 60 seconds after Putin gives the orders, the first Russian ICBMs ignite in their silos. The launch is detected almost instantly. America's space-based infrared system, or SPEARS satellites, positioned 22,000 miles above Earth in geosynchronous orbit, register the hot rocket exhaust signatures. Within seconds, automated systems at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado receive the alert. The message is,
ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to say it again. I said that word. I need to speak American. Ladies and gentlemen, America is going to enter the war. Be ready.
Simple and terrifying. Russia has launched multiple ICBMs, and they have begun the first stage of their flight into a suborbital trajectory around Earth. At T+2 minutes, a call reaches President Donald Trump in the Oval Office. Due to the time zone difference, a launch in the early afternoon in Russia results in it being morning in Washington, D.C. The voice of the NORAD commander is steady but urgent. Mr. President, we have confirmed ICBM launches from multiple sites across Russia. The estimated time to impact the contiguous United States is 28 minutes. We assess this as a coordinated first strike. Trump has the authority to order nuclear retaliation under the doctrine of launch on warning. He doesn't need congressional approval. He doesn't need to consult allies. The presidential emergency...
Yeah, let's stop the country. Let's go to the Congress, discuss this. Meanwhile, Putin is dropping bombs everywhere. By the way, atomic bombs. I mean, of course.
Emergency satchel, aka the nuclear football, or the briefcase containing America's launch codes, is brought to him immediately. The president now needs to decide whether to end civilization as we know it, and he has less than 28 minutes. At T+4 minutes, a more immediate threat emerges from beneath the waves. The Russian Borai-class submarines, positioned just a few hundred miles off the US coast, begin launching their Bulava missiles. These submarine-launched ballistic missiles, or SLBMs, need to travel only 1,200 miles instead of 6,000 to 10,000 to reach land.
I have an idea. My friends, someone needs to send this to the White House. We need a military base on Alaska with a lot of nukes.
Proximity also means the flight time to Washington, D.C. is heavily reduced. At Peterson Space Force Base, the threat assessment updates in real time. 150 ICBMs launched from Russian silos, 64 SLBMs from submarines. Estimated targets include dozens of American cities and military installations and a further dozen targets across Europe. The ICBMs headed for Europe would need roughly 10 more minutes before they drop into the third stage and start deploying warheads within. The SLBMs have roughly the same countdown. But hang on, doesn't the US have a way to try and shoot down the missiles before they reach the US? In theory, yes.
That's the question, honestly.
Yes, there's the US Mid-Course Defense System, or GDM. Essentially, the GDM uses a smaller missile that…
Wait, actually, can the new Golden Dome stop this type of stuff? I'm talking about nuclear, of course.
autonomously tracks its targets thanks to an array of sensors. If the GDM missiles are deployed within a few minutes after the ICBMs are reported to have reached the second suborbital flight stage, they would go into their own suborbital flight to intercept them. But at the scales and speeds involved in ballistic flight, no amount of technological prowess provides certainty. The best analogy analysts have when describing ballistic interception is trying to hit a bullet with a bullet, and both of those bullets move at hypersonic speeds. This is further complicated by the GDM not having the best track record. Due to the limited testing and real-life training options, there have only been 18 tests of the system since 1999. Out of those, the GDM has managed to intercept and destroy a ballistic missile only 10 times. If we extrapolate that to roughly 400 missiles that Russia would launch at Europe and the US, it still leaves over 220 missiles that are very likely going to hit their targets. And even if they miss by a dozen or so miles, the damage they could deal is plenty. Even worse, a nuclear missile usually doesn't carry just one warhead, it can carry up to 10 of them. Each of the warheads can be deployed separately, spreading the devastation around. Russia has also likely launched decoys among the missiles, projectiles whose entire purpose is to give off a higher signature so they are targeted by interceptors. If push comes to shove, a nuclear warhead can be deployed in flight. The ionizing radiation caused by the blast creates a momentary fog of war, further increasing the odds of other real missiles going through the US defenses. So at T+6 minutes, Trump makes the decision that every president hopes they'll never have to face. He authorizes an immediate nuclear retaliation. The OPLAN 80-10-12 strategic deterrence and force employment scenario unfolds automatically. Within 60 seconds, 400 American Minuteman III missiles in Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming receive their launch codes. The nuclear submarines patrolling in the Pacific and Atlantic prepare to fire 20
I'm starting to have a feeling that we are going to destroy the entire world.
Trident II missiles at Russian targets. 2 minutes later, at T+8 minutes in London, the Prime Minister's emergency alert system activates. Britain's 4 Vanguard-class submarines maintain continuous nuclear deterrent patrols. One boat, HMS Victorious, is currently submerged in the North Atlantic with 16 Trident missiles armed and ready. The launch order goes out simultaneously from London and Paris. France's Force de Frappe, its independent nuclear deterrent, begins firing M51 missiles from submarines in the Atlantic. Within minutes, French land-based missiles at the Plateau d'Albion join the salvo. Europe's nuclear response amounts to another 100 warheads targeted at Russian military installations. At T+12 minutes, the Russian submarine-launched missiles are now just minutes from impact. American ground-based interceptors at Fort Greely, Alaska, fire desperately at incoming warheads. The ground-based mid-course defense system activates. Some interceptors find their targets. Most don't. At T+16 minutes, the first nuclear weapon of World War III detonates over Washington, D.C. The 800-kiloton warhead, 50 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb, explodes 1,500 feet above the White House. The seat of the American government literally ceases to exist. The blast creates a fireball reaching 5,400 degrees Fahrenheit, instantly vaporizing everything within a half-mile radius. The Pentagon, just across the Potomac River.
So, you know what, my friends? I know that Americans tend to say that they have technology that they don't show to the public. So, this is my hope. I hope you guys have some type of technology that if Putin really presses the red button explodes in his face. Okay, that was a bit aggressive, or that does not work. You know what I mean? Because if they start to go crazy, it's over.
Is obliterated seconds later by a second warhead. The destruction is absolute and immediate. In the next 15 minutes, Russian warheads detonate across America with clockwork precision. The Norfolk Naval Station, home to America's Atlantic Fleet, is erased by a 100-kiloton blast. The Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, holding the Strategic Command Headquarters, is eliminated. The Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana, which contains at least 50 Minuteman silos, is destroyed before they can launch. In New York, a warhead targeting the Brooklyn Navy Yard detonates in Lower Manhattan. 8 million people have 30 seconds to comprehend their fate before the shockwave reaches them. The death toll climbs exponentially. Early estimates suggest that a large-scale attack on the most populous US cities could cause millions of deaths from the blast and resulting fires. At the same time, Russian missiles reach European targets. London's financial district vanishes as warheads shower the UK capital. The blast wave flattens everything from Westminster to the Tower of London. In Paris, a missile targeted at the Élysée Palace misses by 3 miles, detonating instead over Montmartre. The resulting firestorm consumes 30 square miles of the city. Hamburg's port and NATO's largest logistics hub in northern Europe is eliminated by a submarine-launched warhead from the Baltic Sea. Europe isn't doing much better in terms of trying to save lives. The entire continent doesn't have a reliable interception system. Only a deterrent
We fall first. Shocking.
plan that has obviously failed to work, and an arsenal 5 times smaller than Russia's. At T+2
My friends, there is music today because there is a party close to my house. Sorry for that. Not sure if you guys are listening to this in the mic. But yeah, I'm here recording videos for you, my friends.
24 minutes, America's Minuteman missiles, launched 18 minutes earlier, begin reaching their targets across Russia. However, due to the US operations forbidding the use of nuclear weapons on civilian centers, the targets are purely strategic. The first impact destroys the Plesetsk Cosmodrome, eliminating Russia's ability to launch reconnaissance satellites. Naval base Severodvinsk, home to Russia's nuclear submarine construction, disappears under a 335-kiloton blast. Anything that's not in a nuclear shelter within 3 miles is blasted to smithereens. But the most
You know what? I think we are back.
devastating American strikes target Russia's nuclear arsenal directly. Mobile missile launchers hidden in Siberian forests are tracked by satellite and eliminated by precision strikes. Underground silos in the Kola Peninsula and across the Russian mainland are destroyed with utmost precision and impunity. By T+35 minutes, the first stage of the damage is done. If both Russia and the US commit to using all their nuclear weapons before the other can destroy them, we're looking at 3,400 nuclear warheads detonated or destroyed across the northern hemisphere. Russian missile silos lie empty. Putin is likely hiding somewhere in a bunker. American command and control centers are smoking craters. Cities across Europe and the US are in blazes, with millions dead and even more dying. Then comes the coup de grace. France's final submarine-launched missiles detonate over the Kola Peninsula, eliminating Russia's Northern Fleet headquarters. Britain's last Trident missiles destroy the Pacific Fleet base at Vladivostok. The nuclear exchange is effectively over in less than an hour after the first nuclear weapon was launched to Ukraine, but the dying has only just begun. At T+2 hours, as the mushroom clouds rise over a dozen cities, the scope of the devastation becomes clear. The estimated casualties of a small-scale strike that focuses on military targets over large population centers are somewhere around 15 million. The electromagnetic pulses from high-altitude detonations have destroyed electronic systems across vast areas. Modern civilization, dependent on computer networks, GPS, and electrical grids,
And let's be honest, if this happens, the North Korean guy will also join the party.
begins its slow but practically assured collapse. But nuclear weapons don't just kill with blast and heat. At T+6 hours, radiation sickness begins claiming victims who survived the initial explosions. Hospitals, themselves damaged or destroyed, cannot cope with hundreds of thousands of radiation victims. Fires continue to rage uncontrolled through damaged cities. Broken water mains leave firefighters helpless against the blazes. The areas close to the blast emit lethal radiation, preventing unified first responder operations. Most ominously, the mushroom clouds from hundreds of nuclear detonations begin emerging in the upper atmosphere, forming a radioactive shroud that begins spreading globally. The blasts also scatter soot, which makes breathing the air in the cities potentially deadly. Princeton's estimates of the possible casualties after a few hours reach as high as 34 million, and even that assumes a smaller-scale war. At this point, it's practically safe to say that the war is over, but there's no victor. 3 days later, the world watches in horror as satellite imagery reveals the scope of destruction. Financial markets collapse as investors realize the global economy is in freefall. Supply chains dependent on American and European manufacturing halt immediately. China.
I honestly believe the world will go crazy. Will be a PvP server, you know, player versus player. Forget all the rules, my friends. If this happens, the world goes completely nuts.
Closes its borders and begins emergency food stockpiling. India mobilizes its military to prevent refugee flows. South American nations declare neutrality and begin rationing fuel. 2 weeks later, the massive fires consuming bombed cities have started to die down, but they have already injected 150 million tons of smoke and soot into the stratosphere. This black carbon absorbs sunlight, preventing it from reaching Earth's surface. Ukraine and Russia's grain exports, which fed 400 million people worldwide, have practically ceased to exist. The global food supply, already disrupted by the collapse of transportation networks, faces its first major shock. Global grain reserves, normally sufficient for 75 days, begin running dangerously low. At T+6 months, global surface temperatures have already started to drop, and the change is noticeable. Agricultural regions in the American Midwest and European plains experience crop failures due to reduced temperatures and an immediate reduction in solar radiation. Growing seasons in the Northern Hemisphere have shortened by 40 days, crop yields worldwide have fallen by 60%. The global death toll from starvation reaches 100 million and accelerates rapidly. Modern
Oh my god, 100 million, my friends, this is crazy.
just-in-time supply chains designed for efficiency rather than resilience prove utterly inadequate for this crisis.
Wow.
Nations with food reserves implement martial law to prevent riots. International trade has effectively ceased as countries hoard remaining resources for their own populations. At T+2 years, the nuclear winter reaches its peak intensity. Average global temperatures have dropped 14 degrees Celsius, inducing a modern ice age. Agricultural production has collapsed globally. Rice yields in Asia are down 80%. Wheat production in surviving regions has fallen by 90%. Even hardy crops like potatoes fail in the altered climate. The final death toll is projected to be around 5 billion as people starve and the southern hemisphere tries to recover. The nuclear winter gradually dissipates, taking roughly a decade for the average temperature and solar radiation levels to bounce to pre-war levels. But the modern
You know the thing with Game of Thrones, the winter is coming, the winter arrived here, my friends.
industrial civilization has collapsed entirely by that point. The complex supply chains that produced everything from computer chips to pharmaceuticals have vanished. Countries like India and China, which needed significant food imports to survive, have lost much of their status as leaders of the modern world. Australia, on the other side of the
China would be in totally collapsed because, let's be real, Americans and Europeans are buying on AliExpress, Temu, all of those sites like crazy, and that's what keeps the economy going.
globe and facing a similar nuclear winter nevertheless, is practically transformed into the beacon for the post-nuclear world. With relatively independent food supplies that come from the ocean, as well as a robust transportation and technological network, the country might be able to emerge as a world power. The nuclear winter could make Australia's growing seasons more hospitable for wheat, which is hard to grow there in normal conditions, and could make up for the lack of global food trade. However, the
And this is how the Kangaroo Kingdom starts.
country is not fuel independent, instead
And
relying
you'll
on
buy it.
importing oil and gas. And guess where the countries that were the biggest exporters of fuel went? That's right, up in flames. Even then, the survivors face a planet where radioactive zones remain uninhabitable for decades and spread through the most advanced countries in the world. Genetic damage from radiation exposure affects generations, and biodiversity has collapsed as ecosystems fail during nuclear winter. Of course, this scenario is purely fictional, as neither side so far seems nihilistic enough to launch a full-scale nuclear war.
You know what? A bunch of countries having nuclear weapons in a weird way prevents that other countries shoot nuclear weapons. If you guys think about that, is actually... I know, of course, not having nuclear weapons would be the best, I think. But at least this way, because they know this scenario, right? So.
Instead, the hypothetical illustrates the fundamental insanity of nuclear warfare. Unlike conventional wars that can be fought, won, or lost, nuclear war between major powers has no winners. If Russia decided to deploy a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, it's far more likely that it would only do so to strong-arm Ukraine into surrender. This would likely force NATO to respond with a conventional war. Russia would then retreat, losing the war in Ukraine and reverting the world to the status quo. Until now, only 2 nuclear weapons have been used to destroy cities in history, and more of these weapons still exist.
Americans, I'm looking at you.
The delivery systems are operational, the command structures are in place. All that prevents this scenario is the continued rationality of a handful of world leaders and the absence of a single catastrophic miscalculation. The nuclear arsenals that were built to preserve peace could, in 35 minutes, end human civilization. And the only way to stop this from happening is for everyone to unilaterally agree to disassemble these weapons and completely decommission them. So long as there's just one bad actor, the others can't take any chances. Thanks for watching, and we'll see.
Okay, my friends, great video. I really end up enjoying this one. How the US engineered the most advanced hunter-killer submarine. Holy, this one is probably amazing. My friends, 20 minutes, leave me the number 20 if I should watch this one, because if you guys leave a lot of 20s, I know that you end up watching until the end, and I also know you want me to continue this journey of military stuff. So yeah, thank you so much. See you guys in the next one. Bye, my friends.